Hi, Abbie. This is Dr. Abbie Goldberg, and what a joy to be able to interview you today. I'm a great fan of your work, your research, your writing. Everything that you do is contributing to the field in a very large way. And rather than go into your biography, I'm going to encourage everybody who's watching and listening to this to go to the NCAP website and read all of the wonderful in-depth information about you, because I really want to use this time to hear from you about things that might not be in that biography. And so I want to ask you first and foremost, I know when I get introduced at conferences and so on, people pick and choose what they want to say about me. And frequently I want to stand up and go, no, that's not important. This is what I really want you to know about my professional work. So given that environment, what would you like people to know? Are there four or five things that you just want them to know about you professionally?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think probably something that folks may not know is that, the research that I've been doing with adoptive families has been ongoing for 17 years. So I started the Transition to Adoptive Parenthood project in 2005, thinking it would be a simple transition to parenthood study, looking at, how couples do as they make their first transition to parenthood. How do they choose adoption? How do they make choices and decisions about what type of adoption to pursue around race, other, child characteristics? What do they know and not know about adoption? How prepared are they? But ultimately, it turned into a transition to, kindergarten and transition to elementary school and transition to puberty study. So I just kept, staying with these families who, to be quite honest, they are a part of my life now. I would say it would be silly to say I do research on these people. I do research with these folks, and I have very high retention, I should say, not attrition, because I think the relationship is there. And I really talk to them about what I'm doing with the data, and they form relationships with me and with my doctoral students who do a lot of the interviews. So I think it's not so much that, look at me, I'm so great, I did a study that's been going on for 17 years. It's more a commentary on the families who've committed themselves to talking to me again and again and sharing challenging and really hard parts of their lives, at times when I'm sure they would really, it's a lot to talk to me or to talk to a graduate student. So I just deeply appreciate them letting me and us into their world and trusting me with what they have to share, to keep their data confidential and carefully preserve it, but also use it and use myself as kind of a mouthpiece to communicate what I think are important things about adoption and about family life.
And you were sharing before we started filming that you're actually pursuing a whole other avenue now that's connected to your research, which I think is just so important. Would you like to share that?
Yeah, so many of the ways and the directions that my research has gone have been totally they're driven by both what is happening in the world, what is happening in these folks' lives, and my own curiosity to some degree and my sense of what's important. So for example, we looked at how parents were responding to the 2016 election, how they were coping with COVID. And then most recently, I was reaching out to folks to talk to their teenage children, because their kids are now mostly teenagers. And not insignificant number of them said, that their children were having a lot of challenges and that they were on the cusp of or had already chosen to, place their child in some sort of out-of-home care, either temporarily, like a diversion program or, inpatient hospitalization, or in a number of cases, residential treatment programs or wilderness therapy programs. So I decided to conduct some focus groups with parents so that they could both share what they were going through and get support from other folks, but also so that I could hopefully better understand and communicate this process and these challenges.
that's going to be such important information. And I love that you said that you've connected these folks to each other, that so often our families are isolated in this time of crisis and having difficulty even finding an appropriate program to meet the specialized needs of our children when they hit the challenges that all of us can hit in our adolescence, but with those added layers of adoption, foster care, or however it is their lives have been traumatized at some point. So thank you for doing that. I'll be anxious to see that unfold. I don't know very much about you personally. What things would people love to know about you that has nothing to do with your work? If you have time,
other know. Yes. One thing that some people know is that I'm a long distance runner, and so I wonder if there's some overlap between the people that pursue PhDs in longitudinal studies and marathons, but suffice to say that I run long distances. And I did a running streak during the first year of the pandemic where I ran 365 days in a row.
Oh my gosh.
2 miles a day. And I did
How many miles a day? Say that again.
Somewhere between 2 and 15, but at least 2 every day. So I did that for a full year, and I did it with 2 friends, which was great. I mean, it was a way that we could see each other and be together. And it's like, now we look back on that with such fondness, because it wasn't just about the running, it was about being together and staying in touch. So I'm a distance runner. I also love animals, huge animal lover. I love dogs, I love cats, I love horses. I love art. I'm a big art appreciator and have a lot of art and try to see art in any city that I happen to visit. I always look up what museums are local and what pieces of art, might be in that city that I might, take a look at. So those are just a couple things. Yeah.
Those are that's a pretty full agenda. You're obviously well balanced and taking care of yourself. So I'm grateful for that you'll be around for a while, because what we do is not a sprint, it is a marathon, whether we're running it or doing it, it certainly is. And so it is for our families. I don't know that they realize that when they step into parenthood, let alone adoptive parenthood. Are you a parent?
I am a parent. Yep.
Okay.
I have one child who is 13, and it is an adventure. And I will say that, with a 13-year-old, it's like suddenly there's a muzzle on your mouth about what you can say about them. Suddenly it's, you can't share that. You're not allowed to tell people that. So suffice to say that I have a wonderful child who I love very much and who is hilarious and creative and keeping me on my toes.
All right.
And I'm getting payback for my own adolescence in some ways, as sometimes I'm reminded by my own mother. So yeah.
Well, you know what? That's good. That's good. It does help us to grow. I always ask the question, why do you think this particular child came into your life? What lessons are you supposed to be learning? And so if we can handle that during adolescence, we often come out so much wiser at the other end, having been there.
That's a great thing to be keeping in mind. I think I'm just going to repeat that to myself. What lessons can you learn from this?
I do it every day. Why am I doing this? What lessons am I supposed to be getting out of it?
Yeah.
It never
repeatedly, I frequently tell myself it isn't about you. And that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
With a teenager, this is really not about you.
So what drew you into this particular field? Why psychologist? Why adoption? Why research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so many different ways to answer that question. I wanted to be a psychologist ever since I was a teenager, actually. And so this actually, circling back to this theme of adolescence, in some ways, I found it hard to be a teenager. I had a big personality with a lot of feelings and a lot of thoughts and a lot of goals. And I found it hard to be, not fully independent, even as a teenager. And I have really good relationships with my parents overall, but teenage years were really hard. So I did see a therapist when I was a teenager, and I always normalized that for other folks. And I think through that, I realized, you know, that and my relationship with folks in my life, I think this is actually something I would be good at. But when I went to college and then in graduate school, I became aware that I felt like my role in psychology was something a little bit different than what I initially envisioned it. Speaking to larger groups rather than one-on-one. I realized that I really enjoyed teaching. I really love writing and I love research. I love asking questions. I'm a very curious person, and I'm also pretty relentless when I kind of get an idea or an interest. I want to take it as far as I can go. So those, you know, characteristics lend themselves to really wanting to do research. So I sort of set my journey and I went to UMass Amherst for my PhD and worked with a wonderful scholar who was doing work on things that I cared about: families who were marginalized, mental health, parenthood, women's mental health. And through that work, I really became aware that there was a huge gap, both in, you know, the absence of any research really looking at LGBT parenting. You know, there was a little bit of work, but really not much. And then, you know, as I started getting into the research on LGBT parenting, I realized that it was all on folks that had become parents, you know, through heterosexual relationships or through insemination. And my dissertation was the first transition to parenthood study for lesbian couples who became parents through insemination. So I wanted to look at what happens with, you know, gay male couples, female couples who adopt. I had some friends who were going through the process of trying to adopt and facing some discrimination. And then when I started looking at, you know, the adoption literature, I thought it was so striking that there was no research, with the exception of a study in Israel, on the transition to adoptive parenthood. So that transition was huge, you know, in terms of changing people's lives, the implications it has for adoptive parenthood and for children. So I said, you know, why just study same-sex couples? Clearly there's a need. So whereas most people, the initial intention is to look at heterosexual couples, I hate to say it, but they were actually a secondary focus for me, where I thought, let's just bring them along, because there's probably some commonalities in what all these folks are experiencing, which is absolutely the truth. Much of my research has to do with the commonalities of folks' experiences, rather than saying, you know, lesbian couples experience this and heterosexual experiences, you know, experience this and gay male couples experience this. There's a lot of commonalities because of the nature of adoption.
The normalizing, I think, is very helpful to everybody who reads your book.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think across the board, I try to nuance and, you know, how experiences might be different for adoptive parents of color or gay male parents, or folks obviously that pursue different kinds of adoption. But there are these commonalities and these ways that, you know, folks are more similar than different in terms of the kinds of challenges that they face.
It's such important work. Thank you for sharing your journey to get you where you are. We're all grateful for that. You know, if we look way down the line, because you're young and vital and will be at this for several years, but at the end of your career, when you're thinking about, I'm tired and it's time to retire, what would you want to have, if you will, on your professional gravestone? What would you want people to say? I knew Abbie, and what would it say?
I mean, from the beginning, what I kind of was passionate about and still am passionate about is this idea that all families belong, and there isn't a really one normal type of family. There's no best type of family. And then along with that is this idea that if we could make our systems more inclusive rather than just constantly modifying them for different groups, to my point about people having a lot of shared experiences. You know, a participant in my research, it was a study of teachers and how they were incorporating adoption into the classroom, said inclusion, not modification, is what we need. And I just like, that is just my mantra, because it's not about saying with anything really, you know what, you folks, you can do this, or you folks, you know, you can follow this part of the workbook. It's really about, you know, everyone having an opportunity to be who they are, and not having to feel singled out because of something that makes them different. There's nothing wrong with those differences, right? But if we created enough space for everyone to be authentically who they are at the table, I think that would be really great. So that's sort of my, is a space for everyone, a place for everyone at the table. And that includes all the members of the adoption triad, right? Like the idea that there isn't one voice that's better, or that's more informed, or that is, the most important person in the room. Really, we should all be listening to each other, and collaborating with each other.
Well, I support that 100%. I'm right with you on that belief. I love how you stated it, so thank you. I know that somewhere on your space with this interview for NCAP are going to be some quotes from you, and I think you just gave us a couple of really good ones.
Oh, good.
It will intrigue people. We're hoping a lot of people are watching these with the purpose of learning something, not just getting introduced to NCAP's members, but actually coming away with something new that they hadn't thought of before. And you've already given us quite a bit to think about. But if you were going to teach anybody watching, future psychologists, future adoptive parents, maybe an adult adoptee or a potential birth first parent, what kinds of things would you want them to learn from you, from all the work that you've been doing these past years? Are there some lessons you'd want to teach them?
There's so many folks that I've sort of talked to, so many different stakeholders, right? Teachers and parents and kids. And I guess just really staying curious and staying open and realizing that as much as you know about your experience, right? There's always room to learn more from somebody else. And I always think about open adoption and how certain some of my families were about what they wanted or what their child needed or how things would unfold in the future. And the folks that I feel like have, when I say had an easier time, I mean they haven't struggled as much internally, are the ones that have remained open for things to change. Like I'm saying two things, right? Like listen, be curious, don't think, be open to and also be open to things changing, right? That when you think you know something, maybe you don't know it 100%. Because so many folks, started out with one kind of relationship, for example, in an open adoption, and ended up with something different. And then that changed, right? Or what their child needed changed. Or what they thought they were afraid of, they realized, wasn't something to fear, right? So the folks that I think have had the easiest time are the ones that have always been open to rolling with those changes and acknowledging when they were wrong, to say, this is such an important thing as a parent, right? To be able to say, you're right. I didn't know what I was doing, or I made a mistake. I should have listened to you.
So it's all about adaptation, and it's all about living with paradox, unknowing. More than one thing can be true at the same time.
And that applies to so many different kinds of families. It applies to many other groups of folks that I've, worked with and done research with. The folks that I've interviewed who are parenting queer and trans children, who maybe thought they knew how to best support those children. And then over time, their child said, that's helpful and that's not helpful. Or, what I need now is different than what I needed then.
Thank you. That was very rich for anybody watching this. I really appreciate that perspective, and the way that you stated is so helpful in terms of teaching. What drew you to being a part of NCAP? With connect and strengthen and empowering as their key words. Why are you a member of NCAP? What do you hope it does?
I guess I hope that it will increase those conversations I talked about sort of different stakeholders and members of the adoption community. So, families, including birth families, educators, policymakers, inquiring about people's thoughts about topics that may not seem like they're related to adoption, but interrogating them. You and I were discussing the Roe v. Wade decision. So understanding that, yes, this may seem indirectly related to adoptive families, but, what are adoptive families' experiences, perspectives, opinions, thoughts? How do they see their own lives as being affected? I think NCAP has a role to kind of create opportunities for folks to talk and to exchange ideas and to educate other folks around issues that may interface with adoption. Again, in unexpected ways, whether we're talking about the opioid crisis or COVID or upcoming political events, right? All of these may have unique sort of impacts and be impacted by adoptive families. Opening up, opening records, birth certificates, thinking about, the future of the child welfare system.
Yeah, well, hopefully that is part of the big tent that NCAP is surrounding, and hopefully with all of the marvelous researchers like yourself and the clinicians that are in the front lines, there'll be some opportunity to impact the direction that this country goes, impacting families in general. So thank you very much. As we come to the end of the interview, I wonder if there's something that you haven't shared that I didn't ask you that you'd really like to share with folks, kind of some final thoughts.
I mean, my only final thoughts, which are somewhat specific, is that when you've studied something for a long time, you want to turn it into things that actually have an impact on people's lives. Because to your point, not everybody reads journal articles. Maybe some people are more likely to watch videos or listen to a podcast. I guess a final thought would be to encourage researchers, clinicians, folks that are doing work in this area to think about how they can broaden their impact in maybe creative and unexpected ways, either through creation of websites or social media. I created a website, Teach All Families, where I used some of my research findings on creative, inclusive schools. I sort of tried to make it user-friendly for educators and for parents themselves. So I want us all to maybe think creatively and outside of the box for how we can get our message across in ways that might actually impact more lives.
That is wonderful, powerful. What's the website, if you could give us that?
It's just Teach All Families.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I hope people will plug into that and continue to follow you. I thank you. I thank you for your work. I thank you for the interview. I encourage you to continue as long as you possibly can, because the work that you're doing is clearly impacting the field. And I just say thank you very much for this time together. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate that you took this half hour with us. So thank you, Abbie, very much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.